Rome conquered kingdoms, it destroyed armies, it brought kings to their knees. But there was one woman who made Rome fear the loss of Egypt. Her name was Cleopatra.
More than 2,000 years ago, Egypt stood at the crossroads of the ancient world. And at its heart was Alexandria, a city of enormous wealth, knowledge, and power. But behind its magnificent palaces was a royal family tearing itself apart.
Cleopatra VII was born into the Ptolemaic dynasty Sufflumers, a Greek-speaking royal family that had ruled Egypt for generations.
She was not born into a peaceful kingdom. She was born into a struggle for survival.
The time has come to make a choice, my king. We must act now or lose everything.
Very well, let it be done.
When her father, Ptolemy XII, died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra was only 18 years old.
But according to royal tradition, she was expected to rule alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII.
Cleopatra wanted to rule Egypt in her own right, but powerful advisors surrounding her young brother wanted something very different. They wanted Cleopatra out. Within just a few years, the political struggle became so intense that Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria. She began gathering an army. And while Egypt was being torn apart by civil war, another power was approaching. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria. He was one of the most powerful men in the ancient world, and Cleopatra knew something very important. If she could get Caesar on her side, she might get her kingdom back. Cleopatra understood that survival in the ancient world was not simply about armies. It was about power, alliances, and knowing exactly when to make your move. And Cleopatra was about to make her most dangerous move yet. But getting close to Caesar was almost impossible. His palace quarters were heavily guarded. Cleopatra needed a way inside. So she made a decision that would become one of the most famous moments in ancient history. When the bundle was brought before Caesar, it suddenly opened, and Cleopatra emerged. A young queen who had lost her throne now stood face to face with the most powerful man in Rome.
I have decided.
Cleopatra wasn't simply asking Caesar for protection. She was making a political calculation. Caesar had his own interests in Egypt. Cleopatra understood the stakes. If Caesar recognized her claim to the throne, anyone who challenged her would have to reckon with Rome. Caesar summoned the royal family, Cleopatra, Ptolemy XIII, and the powerful advisors surrounding the young king. His decision was clear.
Egypt has a lawful order of succession. Ptolemy XII left his kingdom under the protection of Rome.
Not all of Egypt agrees with that claim, Commander.
Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII shall rule Egypt together, and this is my decision.
But Cleopatra's enemies had no intention of accepting Caesar's decision. The Egyptian court began mobilizing its army. Caesar had arrived in Egypt with only a relatively small Roman force. Now he was surrounded. The Egyptian army attacked Alexandria, and Caesar and Cleopatra were trapped inside the royal quarter. Streets became battlefields. Fires burned across the city. Soldiers fought for control of Alexandria. And somewhere inside the palace, Cleopatra was waiting to see whether Caesar could survive. Ptolemy XIII was dead. Cleopatra's greatest rival was gone. And now she was once again the undisputed ruler of Egypt. But Cleopatra's victory came with a price. Egypt was no longer simply fighting for its own throne. Rome had become deeply involved in its future. And Cleopatra had just tied her fate to one of the most powerful men in the ancient world.
The time has come for you to sit upon this throne, but under Rome's protection.
I understand.
But Caesar was not going to remain in Egypt forever. And Cleopatra's next move would change the Roman world. Cleopatra's story was never simply about beauty. She was a ruler caught between three worlds: Egyptian tradition, Greek heritage, and the overwhelming power of Rome. The Ptolemaic rulers presented themselves as Egyptian pharaohs while remaining deeply Hellenistic in their culture and identity. And Cleopatra understood how to move between these worlds. She spoke languages, she understood diplomacy, and she knew that survival meant playing a dangerous political game. But then, everything changed. Julius Caesar was assassinated in Rome. The man who had helped restore Cleopatra to the throne was suddenly gone. Cleopatra returned to Egypt, and once again, she needed a powerful ally. This time, his name was Mark Antony. And their alliance would change the political map of the Mediterranean. In 41 BCE, Mark Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus. Their meeting soon became more than a political negotiation. Cleopatra returned to Egypt with Antony, and their alliance grew stronger. Cleopatra and Antony married each other and had children. But while Cleopatra and Antony were strengthening their position, another Roman leader was rising in the west. His name was Octavian, and he would eventually become their greatest enemy. For Cleopatra, the struggle was no longer just about Egypt. It was becoming a struggle for the future of the Roman world. But Cleopatra and Antony's growing power had created a dangerous enemy. Octavian was no longer willing to share Rome's future with Antony. Octavian's propaganda portrayed Antony as a man who had abandoned Rome for an Egyptian queen.
Antony and that Egyptian witch plot against us.
He's correct, gentlemen.
They betray Rome. We must act.
But behind the propaganda was a much bigger struggle. Who would control the Roman world? Cleopatra and Antony prepared for war. Their forces gathered in the eastern Mediterranean. And in 31 BCE, the two sides finally met at Actium. The battle was fought at sea. Cleopatra's fleet and Antony's forces faced Octavian's navy. At first, the outcome was uncertain. Then the battle began to turn. Cleopatra's ships broke through the Roman lines and withdrew toward Egypt. Antony followed her. But the defeat at Actium changed everything. Their military power was shattered, and Octavian had the advantage. Cleopatra and Antony returned to Egypt, knowing Rome was coming. One final confrontation remained, and there would be no escape. Octavian had won, and now Egypt was his next target. In 30 BCE, Roman forces entered Alexandria. Antony knew that the war was lost. Believing that Cleopatra had already died, he took his own life. But Cleopatra was still alive. She was now trapped inside her palace, with Rome closing in around her. Octavian wanted to take her to Rome as a symbol of his victory.
But Cleopatra had no intention of becoming a prisoner or a trophy. She had spent her entire life fighting to remain the ruler of Egypt. Now, she faced one final choice. On August 30 BCE, Cleopatra died in Alexandria. The exact circumstances of her death remain debated. Ancient accounts describe a poisonous snake, but historians are not certain exactly how she died. She was only 39 years old. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty came to an end. Egypt was no longer an independent kingdom. It became a province of Rome. But Cleopatra's story did not disappear with her death. For centuries, she was remembered as a woman of extraordinary beauty. Yet the real story was far more complicated. She was a ruler who understood diplomacy, commanded wealth, and survived some of the most dangerous political struggles of the ancient world. She lived between Egypt, Greece, and Rome, and used every advantage she had to protect her kingdom. Perhaps that is why Cleopatra still fascinates us today.
Not simply because she was loved by powerful men, but because she was a powerful woman trying to survive in a world controlled by powerful men. And in the end, Rome conquered Egypt. But Cleopatra conquered history. History is full of stories that deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to the Hidden Chronicles and discover the next one.